What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another quick solo episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to share 4 tactical tips for investors who are buying value add deals and working through renovations as a component of buying a value add deal. So, for all the folks out there who are buying beat up multifamily properties and renovating the interiors, common areas, exteriors, etc., as part of your business plan, my hope is that I'm going to provide you some very quick value here in this episode. So let's just get right into it. Number one, if you are doing multiple units, and when I say doing, I should say if you're going to renovate multiple units at a property, and especially if you are going to be getting into a larger number of units early in the hold period, you should over renovate one of those early units, if not that first unit, with the goal of testing the market and seeing if there's upside in the rents in that submarket or in that neighborhood. What might make this a little challenging, generally speaking, is let's say you're buying a 20 unit building and you close and you realize that the tenant base that currently occupies the property is not your ideal tenant, and it's likely that you will need to turn over the whole building. If you gain access to that very first unit, well, you could over renovate it. And when I say over renovate, maybe you're going to do the granite instead of the laminate. Maybe you're doing a tiled shower versus a tub surround. Maybe you're doing, using slightly nicer fixtures, doing LVP throughout instead of LVP in parts of the unit and carpet and others. However you describe going a little bit above and beyond what your projected renovation budget's going to be, it's a little challenging to do that on the first one because you're going to be leasing that to a tenant who may not be your true target tenant, but like sits between the type of folks that are living at the property then and who your target person might be because the community hasn't really turned around yet. And that's the same thing if you haven't, done the exterior yet, if there's exterior components to your renovation budget, if you're doing like windows and a roof and common areas, etc. If you haven't done that, you're not there's still a little bit too many variables to really get this insight, but I still think it's worth doing. And I think it's especially worth doing if, for example, you buy that 20 unit building and there's 4 units vacant and 3 more leave in that first 60 days, and you've already done your exteriors and you're doing a whole bunch of these, right? Or you're doing that first one and you're going to get into a handful of other ones soon, and you're not faced with those challenges. In that situation, you want to start high with one of these and test the market, right? Let's say you had your normal renovation scope and you thought you're going to get $1,800 a unit or something like that, and you spend another 2-3 grand with some nicer finishes. Maybe you had a dishwasher, maybe you had a washer dryer, something like that, and you're able to get 1875 or whatever it is, and you realize that, hey, that's actually worth it, right? Spending that extra 2-3 grand is certainly worth it if you're getting another $75 a month in rent. So you decide to go and adjust your reno scope for the remainder of the of that business plan. This is something you want to do early because if it works, you want to do it on the rest of them, right? You don't want to just do this halfway through or towards the end and then realize you didn't renovate the other ones to the same level, especially if the renovations you're doing make it much harder to make these upgrades later on. So for example, if you want to do that dishwasher installation, you better do it up front because if you do new kitchens in those other ones, it's going to be really hard to add a dishwasher later, right? You're going to have to, get into the cabinets and really spend more money to do it. So that's tip number one is start high in one of your early units because it may dictate a difference in scope for the remainder. Number two, model what new developments are doing from a design standpoint when determining the finishes that you should use and the type of style and aesthetic that you're trying to achieve when you're renovating your units. Just because your 10 unit building that's built in 1910, or I should say, just because your building is 100 years old and is a smaller building, doesn't mean that you can't model what the new 2026 built 100 unit asset's doing that's relatively, similar from a submarket standpoint. If they're using certain color schemes, if they're using certain color contrasts, black fixtures, white paint, white vanities, whatever it might be, if they're trying to, if they're focusing on different layouts and you're able to model those layouts in the units that you're renovating, if you're doing more of a gut renovation style, you should know this, right? And you should be modeling what you do after what they're doing. The folks who are building new builds, right? The folks that are doing ground up development, especially institutional quality ground up development, are likely to be doing far more research on what the market wants than you have and that you've done, which isn't, that's not bad, right? They have far more resources to do that. They have much larger bandwidth, a bigger budget. They're hiring design teams. They're hiring, interior designers, whatever. And you can just go ahead and outsource your work to them, so to speak, and model what they're doing. And no, you're never going to be able to turn a 100-plus-year-old building or a 40-plus-year-old building or a 25-plus-year-old building into the same product that new development is building or creating, but you can get pretty darn close, right? And you should at least look at those builds and model what they're doing in your units to, again, stay ahead of the trends. And this is a really easy thing to do on a recurring basis, right? Every quarter, do a little bit of secret shopping in a new building, take some notes as to what they're doing, and replicate it in your deals. Number three, I really believe in the concept that function keeps folks longer term, right? A functional unit, not just an aesthetically attractive unit, but a functional unit is what keeps folks longer than the average length of stay from a tenant standpoint. And oftentimes there are opportunities to do these little upgrades, spend a little bit more, replace some aspects of a unit that may have otherwise been okay and by definition functional, but in the grand scheme, maybe not as functional. And to just spend a couple more dollars when you're renovating units up front to get a little bit more out of your buildings, right? So some examples of this, add that extra cabinet in the kitchen to create some more cabinet space. In our buildings, right, in New England, we get a lot of these units where we have call it a kitchen on one wall, where it's maybe we have 3, 4 lowers, 3, 4 uppers, and then on a different wall we have a stove and a fridge next to each other. Would you build a new, new construction like that? No, but we own a lot of these 120-plus-year-old buildings, and we're working with the space that we got when we're renovating units. But when you think about the function of a kitchen, like having a stove without a cabinet next to it or a surface next to it does not make that as functional, right? Because you want to be able to have your, whatever you're cooking on a countertop right next to the stove that you're working off of. So installing one more lower with one more little run of countertop, sure, that adds cost to your renovation, but it makes your unit much, much more functional. If you're not able to do that, right, because you have plumbing or a forced hot water baseboard running underneath there and you don't really want to move that and you don't want to add a cabinet there or whatever, well, then maybe a bump out cabinet off the wall without a cabinet underneath it, I should say a bump out counter off the wall without a cabinet underneath it, achieves a similar result, right? Let's say you're looking in the bathroom and you've got a pedestal style sink or a mirror instead of a medicine cabinet. No storage, right? Bathrooms need storage. There's got to be some storage in your bathroom. So go for a storage vanity, like a boxed-in vanity, or go in and replace with a medicine cabinet or something like that. Make sure that you have plenty of towel racks, whether it's hand towels, bath towels, towel hooks on the doors, whatever it is. If you have unused space kind of throughout common areas or within your basements or your attic space or whatever, try to convert that into usable storage space. And a lot of these updates or changes don't really have a significant amount of cost, but when you think about it, they make the unit far more functional on a day-to-day living basis. Installing shelvings and pantries, shelving in closets, whether it's bedroom closets or coat closets, a lot of that does go a long way. It's at last 5% that really helps a unit retain somebody because they're not trying to leave because they don't have enough counter, cabinet, bathroom, storage, whatever space. Tip number 4 is bright, inviting spaces are critical, especially exterior and common areas. I mean, interior, of course, as well, but I think a lot of people understand that we're going to try to make the inside of the apartment nice, but oftentimes you forget how to do that in a common area or on the exterior of a property. Big floodlights on the exterior, big motion activated LED lights on the interiors with light paint colors, light flooring colors that feel a space or that make a space feel more open and lighter. From an exterior standpoint, it's really just safety. And again, makes the property feel a little bit more inviting. If you can add windows or replace fogged up, crappy windows in common areas, do so, right? So that more natural light comes in. All of these things help to increase the aesthetic of that space as you head into an apartment. And usually it's like, again, this is like light stuff. This is low hanging fruit, as we call it in the business. You're better off spending a few grand, 5 grand in a common hallway than you are adding a little bit more to each unit, assuming that you have a fixed budget because everybody uses the common area on a day to day basis and they have to walk through the common area every time they go home and when they leave. And then when you're leasing these units, all of your prospective tenants are going to walk through that common area as well. So the lighter the colors that you use are, the brighter the lights that you use are, the more natural light that enters these spaces, the better. And that's going to help you over the long term, investing in these common area spaces and these exterior spaces. Quick little bonus tip number 5, because I don't think this is going to be that big of a news to anyone, but step number 1, whenever you're buying a building, and you should be doing this every few years, you need to power wash your properties. I didn't do this for a long time, not because I didn't know that you could or I wasn't aware of the cost. I just never really thought it would make that big of a difference. But it is shocking how much a property's curb appeal improves, especially if the previous owner or you as the current owner haven't done this in years, how much power washing improves the quality of the exterior of a property. You can go from a building looking a little bit rough, thinking that maybe it needs a paint job, thinking that you got to replace a whole bunch of siding. And if you go ahead and do a thorough power washing of the lot and the property itself, afterwards you end up looking at it going, wow, this looks a lot nicer, right? You probably get a much brighter feel to your vinyl siding if you've got vinyl. You probably get more of a contrast between your white trim and your white, whether it's white soffit, white window trim, and a darker color siding if there's a darker color, because the white ends up getting dirty and starts to look a little bit more off-white or darker over time. And that, I think, is some of the best dollars that you can spend because it's really not expensive to do so. I think people think it's more expensive than it actually is, and it's really not that expensive. So power washing the exterior of the property and power washing your paved lot, if you have a paved parking lot or paved driveway, will pay dividends as well. So that's a bonus little tip number 5. That's it for this episode. This one's nice, short, and sweet. Hopefully you guys get some quick tactical value out of this, and it improves how you attack your next value-add multifamily deal. If you learned something in this episode, please leave the podcast a rating and review. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do that as well. I want to start telling everybody to subscribe more, right? That's how we get these, that's how you get notified that we drop a new episode here on the feed. But thank you all for listening, and I hope to catch you guys on the next episode.